The sun beat down hard on the concrete streets of the Bronx, while the noise of the street market filled the air with voices, haggling, and the persistent smell of street vendor food and sweat. James walked quickly on the broken sidewalk, clutching the $5 his grandmother had given him to buy bread. He was 11 years old, but his face looked much older, weathered by early responsibility and absences that had forged him in silence. He passed by a wall covered in graffiti, ignoring me. Floating, but that wasn't what paralyzed James. It was his face. That man had an expression so serene, so full of peace and compassion, that for a moment the world seemed to stop. James's heart pounded hard against his chest. He didn't understand what he was seeing. There was no one else who reacted. No one was shouting. No one was pointing. Only he seemed to notice. And then the man looked directly at him, as if he had been searching for him in the crowd, as if he already knew who James was. Could touch your heart. James blinked. A car passed between him and the man. When he looked again, he was gone. The place where he had been standing was empty. James ran as if fleeing from an invisible fire. He entered an alley dodging potholes and didn't stop until he reached his grandmother's apartment. He threw open the door. "Grandma, Grandma, I saw him. It was Jesus, I swear." Rosa was making pancakes on the griddle. She looked at him without raising an eyebrow. "Not again with your stories." If he couldn't know how much yet. Because when a child sees something that the world decides to ignore, his soul begins to search for answers that adults have already stopped asking. And James was about to begin a journey that would take him further than he had ever imagined. From that day on, something inside James was no longer the same. He walked slower through the streets of the Bronx, observing faces carefully, as if searching for some sign, although outwardly he tried to maintain his. Followed him everywhere, imitated him, admired him. For Tommy, James was everything he had, and James knew it. Because of this, every morning, even though his heart ached, he would get up, prepare Tommy's uniform, and take him to school. But since he saw the man in the white tunic, his mind couldn't concentrate. During classes in elementary school, lessons about American heroes, his thoughts would wander far away. Teacher Monica would reprimand him for being distracted, but he couldn't explain. lowered her voice. My grandmother says that people who see Jesus have something very special. That night, James gathered his courage and went to St. Jude's Church. He looked for Father Michael, an old man with a hoarse voice and a stern look. "Father, I need to tell you something." The priest listened with his arms crossed in silence. "I saw Jesus. He was barefoot on the street. He looked at me. I don't know if it was a dream or if I'm going crazy." The father sighed deeply. "Son, Jesus is." Would believe him. But something inside him couldn't give up that easily. If no one else had seen him, why could he? And why did he feel so chosen? The answer was still far away, but James didn't know it. He only knew that despite the world's silence, he wouldn't stop searching, because there was something burning in his chest, something asking to be understood, even if no one else heard it. Days passed, and every time James tried to share what he had experienced, the response was the same. "Mr. Henry, do you believe Jesus can walk through our streets?" A man looked at him while stirring the steaming pot. "And why not? But I don't think he'd be walking barefoot around here with all this broken glass everywhere." James sighed. "I really saw him. He looked at me like he knew everything about me." Henry smiled, but with a smile that didn't come from the heart. "Well, watch what you say, boy. People in this neighborhood aren't in the mood for stories. That story was the straw that broke thee." James clenched his fists. "I'm not crazy, Grandma. I know what I saw." She looked at him with tired eyes. "Well then, keep it to yourself, because we don't have time for miracles here, son. What we have is work, hunger, and bills to pay." Tommy, always quiet, listened to her from the table. That night he came to the bedroom and brought him a folded piece of paper. "I drew it," he said shyly. It was a childish drawing with crayons, a barefoot man in a white tunic with a huge smile next to a little boy. of place ignored, but clinging to its roots. And although every word of mockery hurt him like a stone, he couldn't silence the fire he carried inside, because there are truths that don't need approval. And James was determined to find his own, even if he had to walk alone. A midday sun fell like lead on the metal roofs. James was walking through Grand Central Market, holding Tommy's hand, who stared fascinated at the colors of the stalls. The smell of mangoes with hot sauce, roasted meat, and walking. They turned toward an aisle where religious items and objects were sold, images of the Virgin Mary, candles, religious chains, and crosses. That's when he felt it. He didn't see it first. He felt it. A tingling at the back of his neck, a sudden sensation of peace that made him stop. And there he was, about 60 feet away amid the market bustle, the same man in the white tunic. He was walking slowly, with bare feet on the hot cement. The people seemed not to notice him, as if he were. On the ground, in a gray wall. Where? How? He looked at the ground, confused. And there, just where the man had been standing, was something that hadn't been there before. A small wooden cross, roughly made, with a word carved in the center. Trust. James took it with trembling hands and caressed it as if it were a treasure. The warmth of the wood seemed to have its own life. He felt a lump in his throat. He returned to where he had left Tommy, who was waiting with a scared look on his face. Felt lighter, as if something inside him had settled into place. He didn't know what that word carved meant, but he understood that he shouldn't be afraid. Once in his bedroom, he placed it next to his bed like a precious relic. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm going to trust, even if I don't understand, even if no one else believes me." Night fell over the city, and for the first time in weeks, James slept deeply. But in his chest, the question beat with force. Why him? Why could he see it? His large wrinkled hands and his hoarse voice commanded respect. He didn't talk much, just greeted with a nod of his head and went back to hammering saws. One afternoon, while waiting for Tommy to get out of school, James got up the courage. He had the wooden cross in his pocket like a talisman. "Can I come in?" he asked shyly, peeking through the plastic strip curtain. "Come in, boy," replied Don Robert without looking at him, concentrated on fixing a broken shoe. The place was organized. Long time ago, when I was young. I thought I was going crazy, but I learned that there are things that can't be explained with words, only with life. James listened with wide open eyes. And what did you do? I followed my path, but never forgot it, and I never stopped looking for him in others. From that day on, James began to visit the shoe repair shop frequently, sometimes just to listen. Don Robert spoke little, but when he did, his words echoed in James's mind. He taught him simple things. About that man's feet, stepping on asphalt as if pain didn't exist. Do you think he'll appear again? He asked in a low voice. Don Robert smiled. If you've already seen him twice, I don't think he chose you by chance, but be careful, son. Seeing him isn't the hardest part. The hard part is understanding what he wants from you. That night James went home with his hands stained with grease and his heart full of questions. He didn't know if he was getting closer to understanding, but at least he... Because I think about him so much? Don Robert cleaned his glasses calmly. Dreaming is no less real than living. Sometimes dreams say what we don't dare think awake. James didn't know what to say. He just lowered his head. The old man's words made him feel that everything made sense, even if he couldn't explain it. But outside that safe space, reality was different. At school, his grades dropped. Teacher Monica called him after class. James, is everything okay at home? Yes, teacher, but you're... A lie? What if I just imagined it? The old man stopped working and looked at him calmly. Faith isn't blind, son. Faith asks questions, shakes itself up, breaks down, and rebuilds itself. If you never doubt, then you're not really believing. You're just repeating. James swallowed hard. That struck him like a cold wave. But if I don't understand what he wants, how do I know if I'm doing the right thing? You won't always know. But if what you do comes from love, you're not lost. You help your... World decided to turn its back on him. What had once been indifference became mockery, and what was mockery became cruelty. At elementary school, his name stopped being James. Now he was the holy boy, the illuminated one, God's crazy kid. One morning, as he walked toward his classroom, a group of older boys intercepted him. "Hey, miracle boy," said one of the biggest with a sneer. "Today, are you going to talk with Jesus again? Or did the Virgin Mary already appear to you?" Laughter erupted all. Daring to look at him. That day, when he returned home, James entered without greeting anyone, locked himself in his bedroom, threw his backpack to the floor, and lay down in bed with his eyes closed. He didn't cry. He had no tears left. Later his grandmother came in, without knocking. "They brought your homework, son. I don't want to do anything. Is something wrong?" "Nothing that matters to you." Rosa stayed silent for a few seconds, then left the notebook on the table. "Look, James, sometimes." Was James standing surrounded by shadows that were laughing, but above him, a white figure put its hand on his shoulder. James stared at the drawing for a long time. His lips trembled. "Thank you, Tommy. Really." The little boy hugged him around the waist and whispered, "I believe in you. It doesn't matter what others say." The next day, James didn't go to school. He pretended to have a fever. Rosa let him stay home without asking questions. He spent the day at the shoe repair shop in silence. Still just as loud, just as hard, but inside him a small flame kept burning. And though everyone doubted him, though they called him crazy, he knew he had seen something real, and he wasn't going to forget it. It all began with a dry cough during the night hours. James woke when he felt Tommy's body trembling next to him. The boy was breathing with difficulty. His skin burned like embers, and his eyes were glassy. "Tommy is burning up." James shouted from the bedroom. Rosa ran in, and when she "The hospital. His lungs are compromised." James didn't understand all the words, but fear settled into his bones. Seeing his brother so fragile broke him inside. That night, Tommy could barely speak. He had rapid breathing as if every breath cost him effort. "Don't leave." "Yes," he whispered with a weak voice. "Stay with me always, Tommy. I'm here." James sat at his side, took the cross from his pocket, and placed it on his brother's chest. Then he knelt down and closed his eyes tight. "I don't." From nowhere, he looked up. Tommy was sleeping with a calm face. His breathing was softer, deeper. Color had returned to his cheeks. He stayed there looking at him without moving or speaking. Something inside him told him there was no more danger. At dawn, the doctor came back to check on him. "This is unusual," he muttered while listening to the boy's lungs. "Last night he was critical. Today he's stable. It's as if his body responded in a miraculous way." James exchanged a look with his. Pair of boots. "It was him," said James without needing to explain. The old man looked at him for a second and nodded like someone confirming something they already knew. "Now you understand that you're not alone." James didn't respond. He just sat next to him and began to work. Words weren't necessary. That afternoon, the air smelled different, as if the world had stopped being hostile for a moment. James didn't know what came next, but one thing was clear. He was no longer afraid to keep. "Grandson is very sick. Could you pray for my husband? He has diabetes, and his levels are out of control, and he doesn't even want to get up anymore." Then came Mr. Johnson, the street sweeper. "They say you have something special. I don't know if it's true, but I need you to pray for my son. They put him in jail. I can't bear the pain." James listened to them with respect. He didn't promise cures or solutions. He only told them what he could say with honesty. "I'm not special. I just saw Jesus and I." "Okay?" asked James, kneeling down. Even looked at him with empty eyes. "Why do you care?" "Because I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt." James offered him the cross. Even looked at it with suspicion. "What is it?" "Hope. It won't cure your wounds, but it'll help keep them from rotting inside." The young man took it without saying anything. The next day he came by the shoe repair shop and left a note. "Thank you. I'm not ready to change, but I don't want to die anymore." That phrase stuck. James had gone out early to hand out some papers with new phrases. He had one that said, "Where there is pain, something beautiful can be created," and he planned to leave it at the entrance to the community center. Halfway there he heard the shouts, then the gunshots, 3 sharp, brutal sounds. The sound of panic spread through the neighborhood like a wave. Shouts turned into crying. Doors slammed shut. James ran in the opposite direction, pushed by the desperation of those fleeing. James. And died instantly. She wasn't part of any gang, she was just playing. James felt the ground open up beneath his feet. Why? He told Don Robert with a breaking voice. Where was God this time? The shoemaker lowered his head. His face, always firm, now showed cracks. I ask myself that too, son. And what do you do when there are no answers? Sometimes you just have to cry. That night the entire neighborhood fell silent. There was no music, no laughter, no street vendors. Rosa lit a candle for. To the shoe repair shop and sat in silence. Don Robert served him coffee and stale bread. They both drank without speaking. Once I lost someone, the old man said, looking at the floor. My son. He was mugged for a cell phone. He was 17. James looked at him in amazement. He had never heard him speak about his family. I wanted to kill whoever did it. I was filled with hatred, but that hatred almost killed me too. And how did you live with that? I forgave. Not because they deserved it. James began to understand that even in the midst of tragedy, there was something worth preserving. Hope wasn't a fantasy. It was an act of resistance. The night after Lupita's funeral, James couldn't sleep. The image of the girl in her casket, surrounded by stuffed animals and flowers, haunted him like a sticky shadow. He wondered if his cross, his prayers, his messages really made any difference. What good was it to talk about faith if violence kept winning? The next morning, Tommy handed him sheets. He showed the letter to Rosa. Why didn't you give me this? I thought it was better that way. I didn't want to reopen old wounds. But she's my mom. Yes, but she's also a woman who left you and hurt you. James fell silent. At 13, he suddenly felt 40 years old. I want to go see her. Rosa looked at him for a long time and finally nodded. Do what your heart tells you, but go with your eyes open. The trip upstate was on a slow, hot bus. James went with the cross in his. looked at her in silence for seconds that seemed like centuries. "I waited for you many nights," he finally said. "I know," she answered, lowering her head. "And I wasn't there," Tommy cried. "Asked about you. I was a coward. I thought you'd be better off without me. We weren't better. We were broken." She began to cry, her face in her hands. James felt a lump in his throat. He didn't want to hug her. He didn't want to yell at her. He just wanted to understand. "I didn't come to make you feel." Silence when the old man said, "Do you know what people used to do when they wanted to ask for peace or show devotion?" "What?" "They would walk barefoot, to feel the ground, the pain, what they were carrying." James stopped sanding. Barefoot. Yes, not as punishment, as a reminder. Every step told them, "I'm alive, and I'm fighting for something." James said nothing in that moment, but that night he couldn't sleep. He got up, looked for paper and a pencil, and wrote a phrase. "If walking barefoot." Neighbors, they began to prepare everything. They designed a poster with big letters. March of the Barefoot for Hope. The route would go from the church to the wall where Lupita fell. At first, people looked at them with skepticism. Some made fun. What's a bunch of dirty feet going to accomplish? But little by little something changed. A woman left a box of bottled water. A young man offered his speaker to play soft music. A group of mothers embroidered white ribbons with the names of victims. Of footsteps on concrete, and each one seemed to him like a prayer. When they passed in front of the store where a young man had been murdered months before, an elderly woman knelt down and left a flower. When they reached Lupita's mural, a little girl put her favorite doll on the ground. James stopped. His heart beat hard. He raised the cross and held it high for a few seconds, then knelt down. He said nothing, but no one needed him to. The silence was sacred. That night the messages multiplied. Something. And James understood that too, because sometimes it takes walking barefoot to touch the souls of others. A night after the march, James couldn't sleep. His feet hurt. The skin was red, covered with small cuts and blisters. But in his heart there was no pain, just a strange calm, as if something great had ended or was about to begin. The next morning he went out to walk early. The air smelled of fresh bread, and the sky was covered with soft clouds like lazy cotton. The Bronx woke up. Reflected everything without judging anything. James stopped. His heart pounded as if it were going to escape from his chest. He approached slowly. Each step was an eternity. "Is it you?" he whispered, trembling. The man smiled. He said nothing, but James understood everything. His eyes didn't speak with words. They spoke with peace, with compassion, with that force that lifts you when you can't go any further. "I've tried to follow you," said James with a breaking voice. "I've done what I..." Turned and began to walk down the street. James wanted to follow him, but his legs stayed still. He watched him disappear among the trees, among the vendors, among the faces. No one else seemed to see him. No one turned their head. No one stopped. And just before he disappeared, the man turned his face and smiled. That smile was everything. James remained standing for a long time. He didn't know how much time had passed. The world continued its course, but something inside him had changed. Longer here for his mother, for Tommy, for every person he had touched, and for himself. Don't Robert let him cry. Then he served him hot coffee. "You saw him again." James nodded, drying his eyes. "And he spoke to me without words. He told me everything with a look. Then you know what comes next, don't you?" "Yes," he answered, looking at the cross in his hand. "To keep walking, even if it hurts, even if they don't understand." Don Robert smiled. He knew that boy was no longer a child. He was a... Listened. The shoe repair shop stayed open, though Don Robert was no longer there. He had passed away months ago in silence, like he had lived. He left everything to James, the tools, the workbench, and a letter written with a trembling hand. "What you've done with your life, son, is already worth more than 100 sermons. This place is yours. Do with it what your heart tells you." James transformed the shoe shop into something more. He still repaired shoes, yes, but he also repaired souls. There were no luxuries or technology, just a space where the soul could rest. One day even arrived, that young man with empty eyes, who years before had received a cross in silence. Now he had a job, short hair, and a smile that seemed new. "I want to help," he told James. "I want to keep others from ending up like me." And that's how a small group was born that started walking through streets, knocking on doors, talking to those no one else wanted to see. Sometimes James stayed alone in the shoe. Someone who saw him, and I decided never to forget it. And that was enough, because there are those who walk barefoot their whole lives. And there are those who, after seeing him, choose never to put on the shoes of selfishness, silence, or indifference again. James, the boy who was once pointed at for seeing too much, was now followed by those who learned to see with their hearts. It was a warm Sunday when James gathered a group of children on the sidewalk in front of the shoe shop. Some sat on, had the most beautiful gaze I've ever seen. It was Jesus. I'm not talking about a dream. I saw him. He looked at me, and I knew my life would never be the same. The children listened without blinking. Later, I saw him again, at the market. He left me a little cross with the word trust carved on it. From then on, even though everything got harder, I decided to keep believing. A girl raised her hand. And weren't you scared? Very much. They said I was crazy. They ignored me. They made fun of. Those who suffer, and those who forgive, and those who love without expecting anything in return. Tommy, now a teenager, approached with a smile. And he's in my brother who believed when no one else did. James laughed quietly. I was just a boy who refused to forget what I saw. That's all. One of the smallest raised his voice. And if I want to see him too, what do I do? He answered, do what he did. Take care of others. Walk barefoot when you see someone hurting. Not with your feet, but with. Also saw things the world didn't understand. That faith wasn't a certainty, but a small fire you decide to care for every day. He stood up, put the cross in his pocket, and walked toward the shoe shop. But before entering, he turned toward you. And if you also believe there's something beyond what your eyes can see, if you've ever felt the world speaking to you in silence, if you've ever wondered if there's something or someone guiding your steps, subscribe to the channel. Here we tell stories,